Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and over the last year or so we've been covering the transition of over-the-air television signals from the ATSC 1.0 standard to the 3.0 standard. And one of the issues that we've been talking about here on the channel relates to the DRM, the encryption that the broadcasters are putting on their signals to prevent people from retransmitting those signals. And this has created a lot of inconvenience for people like myself who want to watch and record TV like I've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years in the privacy of my home. And in this episode, we're going to update you on what's been going on in this space. Unfortunately, not much, but we are learning some new things about the DRM, including the fact that your device will expire at some point. How long it will take until it expires, we'll get to in just a second. Let's get to it. Now let's start off though with an update on where we are at with our petition to stop the DRM. This is something that the Antenna Man and I have been working on. We crossed over the 10,000 signature mark recently, on our way to 15,000. And what's great about this petition that we're hosting at change.org is that every time somebody signs it, an email goes out to key stakeholders to let them know that we care about this issue. So if you haven't signed it, please do. And if you have signed it, please tell your friends to sign it, because this is an important issue to keep in front of the FCC as this process continues. Speaking of the FCC, the number of filings on the docket for the ATSC 3 transition have crossed 4,000. Most of these now are consumers writing in to express their displeasure over broadcast signals getting encrypted over public airwaves. So definitely fill out a complaint if you haven't already. You can see that in the link you see on screen. And as things develop here, if I'm not seeing sufficient progress, there's a couple of other things that we can do. So stay tuned, get your keyboard fingers ready, because we'll probably have more filings to make in the near future, but we're going to hold off on that at least for now. So let's begin with this expiration issue. I learned this week that there will be a fixed expiration date for the ATSC 3.0 DRM certificates that live on these devices. In other words, when a tuner goes out to pick up an encrypted signal, there's a validation to ensure that the certificate is valid and that device is allowed to decrypt the signal. Those certificates will expire after a certain length of time. I did pull the certificate out of my ADTH box by monitoring network traffic, and I learned that its certificate expires in 30 years. The Zapper box, after reaching out to them, also has a 30-year certificate. So that's certainly a good long time. I think it's probably going to be longer than the ATSC 1 standard will have lasted for once we transition. But nonetheless, every box will have a fixed date in which it essentially stops working, at least for encrypted content. Now, as I was recording this video, I did get some information in from the ATSC. You'll see another statement from them in a few minutes. They did say that the minimum certificate length is 10 years. They have a 10-year, a 15, a 20, and a 30. And the pricing varies based on the volume of the product, the intended sales of it, along with the duration. So some may choose the shorter length certificates if it makes financial sense to do so. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that in my home, I've got an HD Home Run Prime that I've been using to watch my cable TV stuff with. That was one of my first videos I did as a pro YouTuber, if you will. And that box is now over 10 years old and still in service. So although people may upgrade their TVs in shorter durations, some of these products may actually exist in the home longer than a decade. Another thing that I learned this week, and was also backed up by sniffing network traffic, is that at the moment, ATSC 3 devices are always phoning home if there's an internet connection available when they go to tune an encrypted channel. This includes TVs that don't need an internet connection to watch TV. I've heard from people who have been monitoring traffic who have seen this exchange of certificates over the internet versus over the air. So if the internet connection is there, there will be some kind of connection back to the broadcaster's servers for validation. Now, this next bit of news, unfortunately, is that we don't have a lot of news on the status of DRM for gateway devices. What is a gateway device? Well, a gateway device is something like the Tableau or the HD Home Run, where you've got a box that you plug your antenna into, and then that puts the TV signal out onto your network, so you can pick up your phone and watch TV, your laptop, your smart television, your TV box, whatever you've got with a screen, you can watch TV on. And these devices have proven to be very popular with consumers because they largely replicate the experiences they have with their streaming services. And what's been great about ATSC 1.0 is that there were no restrictions on using a gateway device. In fact, the Tableau is owned by Scripps, a broadcaster, and they could not make an ATSC 3 product right now because there's no way to make it work due to the encryption. So what's going on here? Well, the makers of the HD Home Run, in fact, the CEO of the company, Nick Kelsey, put up a lengthy explainer on their forums the other day about the status of everything. So let's begin by looking at Apple TV, iPad, iPhones, and Macs. Right now, because they are using Google Widevine DRM for ATSC3 encryption, you're not able to currently watch encrypted content on Apple devices. And of course, Apple's always touting how secure they are, but apparently not secure enough for broadcasters right now. So those are out. Another thing that's happening is that Roku TVs and Roku streaming boxes are also not compatible due to this Google Widevine issue. And there's also some other issues that the folks at Silicon Dust, the makers of the HD Home Run, are seeing related to installable apps on Roku's tuning into this protected content. So we haven't made any progress there, although there are apparently ways in which a Roku TV that has an ATSC 3 tuner could tune to that content live, but of course not through an app. Similar story here, unfortunately, with Xbox and Windows 10 and 11. If you remember, the Xbox was actually one of the first devices that could tune encrypted cable content on the HD Home Run Prime, which was a cable card device. But right now, it cannot do ATSC 3 either. LG TVs, along with Samsung TVs, are out, at least insofar as gateway product usage. There are no apps that can run on the LG TVs that will work with a gateway product. And the only thing that kind of does work right now is Android. And if you look at the two boxes that are currently out there, the ADTH box and the Zapper box, both of those run Android in the background. Because it's Google, and Google has the Widevine encryption there, that is why we're seeing Android primarily on this current crop of boxes. But it's still not possible to use an Android device as a gateway client because there are requirements that are draft or incomplete still at this time. And we're looking at, I think, at least a year since they started encrypting. So they really had no plan for rolling this out. If they had one, all of this stuff wouldn't be in flux right now, but that's where things are at. And I'm not very optimistic that things are going to get better. All of this is kind of running contrary to the broadcast encoding rules that the A3SA, which is the arm of the broadcasters responsible for encrypting the content, said would be followed in regards to all this stuff. They've got a lot of great bullets here about what viewers will be able to do, but unfortunately, none of the devices that viewers have will actually work in a way in which they can do these things. So that is where it is at, unfortunately. Zero progress on gateway development here. And again, I'm not optimistic that we're ever going to see it work. Now, in fairness, I did reach out to the ATSC, and they did provide me this statement on the status of all of these things. They said the A3SA, remember, they're the group that organizes the encryption part of this standard, and its member broadcasters want to maximize the footprint of ATSC 3 services, and so their goal is to enable playback of encoded content on a range of devices, including Apple TV, Roku, Windows, Xbox, Samsung, LG, and similar devices. They do say that the current specs in pre-release draft form are expected to work on Samsung and LG devices as is or with only a minor modification. In addition, they are working with an accessory manufacturer to develop a prototype implementation of A3SA that works on Roku-based devices, which we can expect to add to our specifications as soon as we can. Adding support for all of these platforms is a high priority on our near-term roadmap. And my concern here is just that they're kind of controlling the market, aren't they? In that they're picking and choosing who gets to run these prototypes and get everything working first. Whereas I think it would be better to have the market just kind of work itself out as it did on the ATSC 1.0 standard. Now, Zapperbox posted up something interesting on their upcoming feature roadmap. In version 2.4, they've got this new feature called broadband channels. Now get this, the broadcasters will be pinging out URLs for streaming video. And so what happens is your box will pick up the URL over the air and then tune to the channel over the internet. And what Zapperbox is saying here is that this is probably how broadcasters will be distributing 4K content. They will not be broadcasting it because it uses up so much bandwidth on the signal. So they'll instead send you a URL and your box will tune to it over the internet. I'm beginning to wonder if we even need them to be broadcasting over the air with those public airwaves any longer. Might there be a better use for those public airwaves? And there might be if they do want to roll back their use of them. One area that I've been working on here in my home state of Connecticut is trying to figure out a path forward for cable access channels. And these, of course, are your public access, public TV channels that have been around since cable TV came around. And they created these channels because cable companies were initially granted a monopoly, some still have one, to put wires up on the poles and kind of be the only game in town. In exchange for that, they had to do some things for the community. One of them was giving the community access to sending out their own TV signals on their wire, and they did that through creating cable television studios. Here in my home state of Connecticut, there's still some regulation on the books that requires cable TV providers to do this. The problem, though, is that cable TV customers are dropping the cable side of their subscriptions and keeping the internet. And what's happened now is the money that cable companies were required to fund these stations with is going away, because when people cut the cable service, that requirement is cut as well, because the internet side of the business is not regulated in the same way, even though it's on the same wire. So I have been involved locally here in Connecticut trying to help a bunch of regulators and elected officials and everyone else involved find a solution to this problem. And you can read more about it on this docket that's up on the regulator's website. But I wonder if broadcasters don't need the signals any longer. Perhaps we can find a better use for them that would still serve the public good by maybe giving a new lease on life to local access television, give them the ability to broadcast over the air in addition to streaming, and it could be a big win for everyone. This, by the way, was how I got my start in media production when I was 13 years old. And you can actually see one of my episodes from 1990 up on the link you see on screen here. I had a cable access show. This was the start of all of it for me. In fact, when I started my little TV show, it was about video games. And had I stuck with that topic for that long, I probably would be doing more than working out of my basement right now. But it's still an invaluable resource, I think, not only for kids looking to get into media production and developing media literacy, it's also important for communities to have this access. And one of the things that I've been noticing in the course of helping to contribute to this issue in my state is that the algorithms from YouTube and Twitter and everybody else don't seem to promote these local content sources because they don't generate a lot of traffic, even though there is an audience for them. So this is an area that I think needs some attention. It might be a better way to make use of the public airwaves in the future if clearly broadcasters are not as interested in using those signals for the public benefit any longer. So we've got more to come on this, but I just wanted to put this out there. I would love to hear about what's happening with cable access in your state, because every state is different. But I would imagine other cable access channels throughout the country here in the U.S. are dealing with the same things. And so that's going to do it for this one. Unfortunately, we don't have much news here because not much has happened. The FCC still hasn't said anything about what they plan to do on encryption. And because this transition is not due now to take place until 2027, my guess is they are punting it to the next administration. So I think this presidential election will be consequential as to what happens with broadcast TV rolling forward. The broadcasters really believe that this encryption is important for preserving their business model. You and I know that it's actually going to do the opposite to their business model, because less of us will want to tune into over-the-air TV if we can't watch and record it the way we want. But they are in that mode here. They're not budging off of it. So the only way they're going to change their mind on this is for the regulator to tell them to. And so that's why I think when we get into the next election, this will be an important issue for us to keep track of. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Budley, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Steve Green, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.